Welcome to Implement This with Microsoft Business Solutions MVP Britta Rexted and co-host Matthew C. Anderson, where we have an insider's discussion around the things we consider when implementing Dynamics 365. On today's episode, sponsored by Analogic, Britta and I are talking all about forms in Dynamics 365. Maplytics by Analogic is a market-leading, certified for Microsoft Dynamics 365 geoanalytical mapping app. Maplytics empowers users with powerful map visualization and routing capabilities within Dynamics 3 CRM to drive better sales, improve business processes, and engage the right customers at the right time. Maplytics now works with Dynamics 365 version 9 and Dynamics 365 app for mobile and tablet. Analogic is a leading Microsoft Gold Dynamics CRM ISV, delivering best-in-class Dynamics 365 solutions, as well as cost-effective and high-quality programming services. We thank Analogic for their sponsorship, and now on with the show. So here we are, back with another episode of Implement This. Hi, Britta. How are you?
Good, Matt. How are you doing?
I am doing really well. I'm hoping that this will be an informative episode today.
Oh man, really?
Yeah, I started it there. Gotta get the pun in.
It's so hard to recover from that.
Recover?
Okay,
this is gold. Pure
please
gold.
Keep listening. I have a good hack at the end for Quikrete Forms and subgrids. So please do not turn off the podcast due to that terrible joke. Okay. Moving on. Okay. So forms. There are so many types now. Remember when I learned to update forms back in 2011? You just updated the form.
Mm-hmm.
Like there wasn't anything to learn. There was a form, and if you wanted, you could have two forms. And now it's really intimidating when you look at that list if you don't know what they all are. So I think we should start by talking about all the different types of forms so you know what to use. And then there's a lot of best practice. I see people, especially admins, doing customer appeasement or user appeasement instead of user adoption, and they end up digging holes for themselves. So we should talk about that too.
Yeah. Absolutely. And I think we alluded to that in previous episodes as well.
Yes.
Control how many forms you're making. And so I guess just starting off with the different types of forms, and the one you already mentioned is the good old-fashioned main form.
Mm-hmm. Yep. I think when you think about a form, you're probably thinking about a main form. If you don't know what we're talking about, you're thinking about a main form.
Looking at it with an individual record, you are seeing it,
it's a whole page.
Yep. And that may be a something that you end up seeing in read-only mode, or you might see it as you're creating a new record, but it's when you have the full window and panel there when you're creating things.
Yep. And also you can do multiple tabs. I mean, there's really quite a bit of configurability there. Everything else we're going to talk about is a much simpler form. So the main form is usually your end-all, be-all. Like for your account record, you might have a lot of data you track about that account, but then you might use other forms throughout the system to just show key pieces of data when you need it. Mm-hmm. Because at times you don't want to overwhelm people. You want to just say, I know all you need is these three fields. So we're going to display that where you need it and not make you open the whole page and look at everything.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so mobile is kind of interesting. We still have mobile forms, but we don't really need them anymore.
Yeah, mobile form not so much needed anymore. You can certainly go and see them, but it was really meant for the phones and devices of yesterday, or even kind of old unsupported browsers. I saw some situations where people would kind of get the mobile form by default, and we're like, oh, what's this?
Yeah, exactly.
But really, I mean, that's all but unused at this point in anything modern. I mean, really the move of Dynamics to the mobile client app or Mocha app, and then especially with the most recent updates to Dynamics of having the unified user interface, and you're not having a separately managed mobile form that people have to worry about or think about or kind of suffer with, as it was with the case of those old school mobile forms.
Something to keep in mind with that, though, a gotcha I'm seeing popping up with users sometimes is that because it is interactive now, your same form will say, oh, okay, my screen is this big, I will arrange things appropriately. Mm-hmm. If your users are just giving CRM a little sliver of their monitor, if they have those tiny, cute little square monitors, that means that your IT people don't love them. If they have those, then they might be missing things. And so maybe their navigation's too skinny, maybe too many things happen behind the three dots, other things go on. And so it is just a little bit of a gotcha. It's great, and I think it's a great move for the product. Just keep in mind, though, if you make your CRM windows too small, you might be missing buttons or missing things. So if you panic, just make your window bigger.
Yeah, and another tip on that, because it's not always just about the size of the monitor that you have. Just your general screen resolution, even if you have a good monitor, can play into that, and also what your zoom level is within your browser and within your desktop. That's one thing where sometimes things can be a little bit squeezed off the page, even if it's generally a well-structured form. If somebody's zoomed in at 230%, they're probably only seeing that sliver of what it should be, and things are not going to look like you would normally expect them to.
Yeah. My first panic moment when I can't find what I'm looking for is to make sure that my screen is as big as possible, or that window is full size. And then a lot of times what I'm missing comes back. Like it's there. It's just tucked behind something. So if you have the opportunity to teach your users that before they pick up the phone and call you in panic, they should make the browser, or that window, as big as possible.
Yeah, and
it might solve their problem.
And I think that's a good call out of, when you're configuring forms like that, just check it at different kind of amounts of space, amounts of width when you're looking through it. And I think as I've been working with the unified user interface, it's actually a little bit more dynamic. There's less of that kind of double checking that I'm doing there. It just does a better job of handling it. I think because we know better like how responsive design should work. In kind of the main or the traditional Dynamics user interface, it had its own special responsive design, which kind of followed its own structure and fit a lot of needs really well, but it had special rules, and unified user interface does a better job with that across all the form types.
Absolutely. So let's talk about Quikrete, which we've actually already talked about before on other episodes.
Yes, we talked about that back on episode 14, some of our favorite Salesforce automation things.
Yes. Quikrete Forms are really great, and I would say, and I think we talked about mapping there too, which is where you bring data with you when you're creating a new record through the relationship. And so Quikrete is really great for that. I think the frustration I see some brand new baby admins get into is that you're like, oh man, I like that Quikrete form so much, I want to use it all the time. But it's only for creating records. So you can't display things you already have in Quikrete, which is a little bit of a bummer. And sometimes you do run into limitations where you can do that on the main form, but you can't do it on Quikrete. So Quikrete is for fast data entry. I like to think almost nothing should be required. That is for brain dumping. When someone who has kind of a scattered thought process goes, oh, you should have a Quikrete form that they can just quickly throw in what they need and then get back to what they're doing without getting distracted. So it's not to replace the main form. It's just for those little epiphany moments.
Yeah. Well, and I'll say there is another situation where I'll use a Quikrete form where I only have one or two fields on it, and they are required fields when I'm getting kind of some metadata about a record I already have open. And one of the quickest ways to capture that in a kind of a many-to-many situation is to use a Quikrete form. And that's a great way to do it. And in that situation, you do want it required. Otherwise, it's blank metadata.
Yeah, otherwise there's no point.
Just from a usability standpoint, a comment around the Quikrete form is keep in mind that Quikrete can be great when you are creating a record from another record.
Yes.
But there can be some confusion, especially for users that are getting familiar with Dynamics. Quikrete is also available at the highest level navigation within Dynamics. And when you choose Quikrete from there rather than from like a subgrid, it doesn't carry the context forward. So some of the field mapping, it's not going to be there if you choose to Quikrete from the wrong place. So just keep that in mind as a training point that you want to hammer home if you're going to leverage Quikrete.
And how you'll know you're running into that issue is if you're looking at your data, and from a data integrity standpoint, that lookup to the parent record just seems to be missing a lot. That's probably because they're just going straight to Quikrete, and that's sometimes hard for a user to understand. They've got to start from where they want the relationship to be. Otherwise, you have to teach them to populate it themselves. Mm-hmm. So you'll see that in your data, and instead of getting mad at your users, just kind of try to redirect them in the process of where you want them to launch it from. Instead of teaching them to hit that plus sign up the top of their screen, make them actually go through and hit it from the lookup, and then it will populate.
Yep. Great one. Shall we move on to Quikrete Forms?
Yes, please.
Also discussed in episode 14.
Yes, absolutely. So a little bit of a review there. Quikrete Forms are awesome. However, if we were ever to have a race, Matt, of the fastest customization to make users create support tickets, I think it's Quikrete Forms.
Oh, really?
Yes. I don't know why we would ever play that game, but actually sounds kind of fun. How fast can you make your users angry and start making tickets? And that's because a Quikrete form is read-only. And it's really cool the way it's laid out. You can stealth hide whatever you want. You can have a Quikrete form that is just one field if you want. Mm-hmm. And if you'd like to get very arts and crafts with it, you can really hide it on your form so it feels as though it just blends in with everything else. And you're going to make your users very upset very quickly because they don't understand why they can't edit that field. And then they'll think CRM is broken. And then they tell everyone else CRM is broken. And then you get pulled out of a meeting because everyone thinks CRM is broken and you just forgot to tell them it's a Quikrete form. So don't hide them. Don't be stealthy. That's my trick. Now, with one exception. So I'll say the rule and then I'll give you my exception. So don't be stealthy. I usually put them in their own section and I label the section and I usually put something like read only. They are really great though, especially if you're replicating data. Gone are the days of having the same field on multiple records and having a workflow go and stamp it. Mm-hmm. I love this because it's up to date all the time. I would say if you are just moving one field and you do really need the data and all that, then I use a calculated field just to move that data from point A to point B instead of a Quikrete form. Mm-hmm. Then it's naturally locked. It makes more sense to the user. Same level of automatically up to date, which is nice over using a workflow. But sometimes a calculated field, if you just need one thing, is better than a Quikrete form. So my hack, and this is where I do blend and camouflage, is that so something we're limited by in subgrids is you have to have the subgrid be about records that are related. So usually using some kind of a lookup. So a lot of times our data is related, but maybe I'm 2 hops away from my data. It's not immediately related to the record that I'm on. Well, if you can use a subgrid, if you can use a Quikrete form and then put a subgrid in it, you can put anything related to that related record in your subgrid. So it gets you a little bit further. It's not going to be on the form all the time. It'll only pop up if that lookup is populated. Mm-hmm. But I have had it as a nice way before to meet requirements where if we already, like let's say we already have something for that customer, they want to see the other ones, and the something is not an obvious easy to get to in the subgrid. It's not directly related. Yep. You can kind of hack it and get a little further. So that's the only time that I do it in stealth mode. Otherwise, I make it incredibly clear. This is a quick view. Yep. It is not editable. Go here to edit it.
Excellent. I hope that tip does make up for the bad joke I used at the top of the episode.
I think so. I think it will. It's a pretty good tip. Okay, cards.
Cards,
Matt.
Yes, so cards are a rather new type of form inside of Dynamics. So this is used within interactive dashboards. If you're going to show something in a queue, if you're going to show something in that view in an interactive dashboard, you need to have cards set up in order to do that. So this kind of first showed its way through on the Interactive Service Hub. And is now continued to be used in the unified user experience for those interactive dashboards.
Cool.
Yeah. And that's a place where I haven't gotten a lot of use out of it in the implementations I've worked on to date. So anybody out there who wants to tweet at us, comment on the show, please do that if you have kind of good tips and tricks or best practices there. As the platform expands, we can only have so much knowledge there. So please share the wealth.
So we keep seeing this word interactive experience, experience pop up other places. So now we have the main form that we've known and loved, and we have main interactive experience.
Yeah, which was, again, kind of coming around from the Interactive Service Hub, from whence it came anyway. And with the unified user interface. From what I can tell, this one is phasing out. I haven't seen an official deprecation of it, but you can't create a new one with that interactive experience label, from what I've been able to tell. So I think that that one, similar to my depth of knowledge around the card, hey, if you're out there listening to this and you have more detail, please, share it with the community here, tweet or comment on the show.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's talk about things that feel like they should be a form but are not a form. Because sometimes you're saying, where on earth do I edit that form?
Wait, you mean
it's not a form at all.
You mean like Microsoft Forms? You can edit those.
No, I mean like global search or hierarchies or things like that. Where you're looking at something that's like 3 or 4 fields, feels like there's a card somewhere. Maybe you saw the word card and thought that's what it was for, and it's not. So I think we should talk about that. We did talk about it a little bit in episode 5, so a little bit of a callback to that. Yeah. But we used a lot. The quick view search is probably one of the most powerful out-of-the-box things. I mean, we use that without realizing we're using it all the time.
Yes.
And so historically, we've used this, when you let a user type in the search box when looking at a view and, surface what they need, and that's always been great. But now we get really specific about what columns actually show up in these little tiles that feel like forms, but they're not. They're sneaky.
Right.
Do you have any tips for that?
So, I guess it really, from a creation of the quick view standpoint, you just want to be very intelligent or very precise around what you have set up in those first 3 columns of that data, because you want to make sure that when people are seeing that view, I mean, if you do nothing and you have a custom entity, you're going to see the name of the record and you're going to see the created on date, which for most record types is pretty irrelevant. And things that make sense in in the list view quick find search down. May not make as much sense in the context of a global search where that's all the information that you have to go on. So, I mean, there's not going to be a, one size fits all solution there, but just keep that consideration in mind because it feeds through in more places than you think. Yeah,
absolutely. So we talked a little bit on the show about my battle scars from appeasing everybody and giving them their own form as a way. So back in the day when I was a coward, I still a little bit of a coward, but instead of having users come together and debate out what should be on forms, I just decided that we'd make everybody happy and give everybody their own form, and it was a nightmare. And some things have gotten a lot easier. So we still have the ability, you can have multiple main forms, which there are sometimes you really do need that. Maybe customer service, their form should look entirely different than sales. So there are times for that. The other time I will use it is sometimes in a training scenario, I will have a security role specifically for brand new users. I will make CRM as small as possible as I can just to help them not get overwhelmed. And then I will use a very simplified version of everything, and I will give them their own form just so I can ease them in because dropping them in at the deep end is just a little mean.
Yeah, and truly from a best practices, when you consider user maturity in an implementation, there's this desire because you can have a lot of stuff on the form. You can ask for a lot of detail from those users and have, 25, 35, 50, 100 fields on the form. Less is more, especially, for new users or people who may not want to be using the system in the first place. That stuff on the screen makes it feel complicated, even if it's not really that complicated. But it gets busy and it gets intimidating, and that's a very real and human reaction to that.
Yeah. Sometimes I will do 2 forms where I'll have a standard form and then I'll have one where I add -detail at the end. And so then the user who really does care about that date field from 2 years ago, they can go see everything, because you will have users who want to see everything. But the trick with that is that when the user goes back to that record type, it's going to load the last form they used. And I find users have a hard time remembering to change back. And so all of a sudden you have this little bit of an upset because, well, my form doesn't look like her form, and then people get all confused. So be really careful in having a specific user have multiple forms. Make sure that they are confident in switching back and forth on their forms, because the likelihood they'll get stuck, this is where I see it a lot in self-implemented places where they bring me in to coach, is that the team doesn't understand why CRM is so different for each of them. And that's because once upon a time they picked a new form and they never remembered to go back, and things like that happen.
Well, and you know, there are other contexts where you would use multiple forms. A good and you do want to focus in on the training side of it. And an example I'll use there is different forms for account types, because there might be different information that you want to show on the form for, say, a customer versus a vendor. You're not going to have opportunities associated with a vendor, probably. And you aren't going to have, like, you know, open orders or, you know, desired, you know, information about things that you would get from a vendor of yours that you would show on a customer form. So in that case, having the multiple form types, you know, you have to have both of those visible in your system, at least to some users. So consider how you're going to use either form level role-based security to lock those down, maybe some sort of scripting to be able to help, you know, for one account type, make sure it shows the right account form for that, or just, you know, getting back to the training side of it, letting people understand that, oh, if you go to a vendor's form versus a customer's form, you want to flip this around because, of course, there's different detail that you want to see there.
Yeah. I think if you, in that scenario, if you can get away with it, I would try to get there all the way in business rules, because then it will do it for the user. But there are things that we can't do in a business rule. So today in a business rule, we can't collapse a tab, for example, or we can't as easily, can't show and hide a subgrid. You can do that if you use the quick view hack, but you can't just with a business rule show and hide things like that. And so if I can, I try to use a business rule to make it feel like multiple forms, because then the user doesn't have to do anything. And I'm not using scripting. But there are scenarios where what we have, or maybe you have other things, you have web resources or other things in a form that are radically different for one type of account versus another. Then multiple forms is probably what you have to do. Some scripting might be necessary. I would probably rather, if I had the user base I needed to switch between the forms, I would rather have multiple forms than throw a bunch of scripting in there. And that's just, you know, my personal preference, because I don't code, so I'm very biased.
Well, and you know, that same approach would be used. I mean, if you have those different types and you're also using something like hierarchies, you know, hierarchies, when you're looking at them, have a similar experience of being able to change to different views of what's being showed for the records in the hierarchy. It's leveraging quick view cards for that, and you can choose which one your default is going to be. But if you have a hierarchy of, say, customer records versus vendor records, maybe that's a hierarchy, maybe it's not. But you know, for that purpose, that's not a place where you have easy hooks to do scripting for that, because you can't control the page that the hierarchy is displaying on to even inject that code without doing something unsupported. And don't do unsupported customizations to dynamics.
Just don't. Just say no.
So yeah, I mean, you know, kind of going back to the training side of it and a little bit less code, it makes it a little bit more universal for people as well.
Absolutely.
Cool. So we've covered a lot on forms. Is there anything else, best practices or nice to knows or anything like that you want to cover? Or are we looking good for this one?
I think we're good.
All right.
Tweet us with whatever we forgot. See you next time.
Yeah, take care.
You've been listening to Implement This with Britta Rexted and Matthew C. Anderson. Do you have a business problem you'd like us to discuss on the show? Reach us through our website, implementthis.org, where you can also subscribe to the podcast. We're on Twitter, too. Britta is at MacGyverCRM, and I'm at MC Anderson. Thanks so much for listening.